Good evening, everyone. So, for my signature assignment, I decided to focus on higher education and whether it should be seen as a public good or a private good. I chose this topic because in my landscape of higher education course, I had to participate in a debate. Some groups had to argue that higher education was a public good, while others had to argue that it was a private good. And this debate really got me thinking, and I became really interested in this topic. So I felt as though this signature assignment would give me an opportunity to further my knowledge and expand on this controversy. Without doing any of the research, the biggest argument is that higher education is a public good. However, once you dive into the research, you would find, as I have found, that there isn't just one prevalent or dominant argument. There's about three. Higher education is a private good. Higher education is neither public nor private. And higher education should be private as well as a tradable commodity. This last bullet actually causes much controversy, and I will expand upon that throughout my presentation. So, what is a public good? Public good is non rivalrous, which means it doesn't create any competition. It's non excludable, which means it's obtainable by anybody. Collectively beneficial, regardless of who participates in the good, everyone in the community will benefit from it. And most importantly, a public good is generally financed by the state, which means it's not a part of the market. So, in order to figure out which aspects of higher education make it a public good, I found that it was helpful to call on which functions higher education actually serves. And 3 out of the 6 scholars that I focused on for this project did this same thing. And although they had different positions in this controversy, there were 3 common threads in the functions of higher education: generate new knowledge, prepare students to be active citizens in society, and provide good moral and character structure. So, taking these step by step, knowledge is a public good, and if it were to be treated as a private good, that would make it not accessible to everybody. And since it wouldn't be accessible to everybody, it would be harder to generate new knowledge because only certain people would have the tools to do that. So, preparing students to be active citizens, this can be anything from participating in presidential elections to becoming a part of the workforce. Both of those things eventually benefit the greater good if accomplished properly. And lastly, providing good moral and character structure. This could be something as simple as, okay, you have good morals and good character, which means you're not going to commit crimes, which means the crime rate in your town will go down, which means that your town would be safer. So, things like that. Higher education as a private good. So, a private good only benefits the individual who participates in the good. It's excludable, therefore, it is marketable. It's rivalrous, which means it creates competition, which means that it also is marketable. It's privately funded, another thing that makes it marketable. So, going back to privately funded, rivalrous, and excludable, this ties into the supply and demand. And with higher education, the supply would be, of course, the knowledge from the institutions, and the demand would be the recent high school graduates. And rivalrous, you have to submit applications, you have to submit entry essays, whichever student has the highest GPA usually gets into the school. It's excludable because there are certain people who can't afford the schools. There are certain people who don't get into the schools because either their resume wasn't good enough, they don't have what the school is looking for, maybe they don't fulfill certain demographics. And with privately funded, a lack of funding from the state makes something public private. So, funding from the state will say financial aid, federal financial aid. If a student doesn't get financial aid, usually they have to pay out of pocket for the school, or they have to take out loans that they'll eventually have to take back. So, therefore, their education is being privately funded, which makes it a private good. But the question is it really that simple? So one of my scholars, Marginson, actually had a diagram in his article, which I will recreate, and it's a simple breakdown. So public equals government, funded by the government, which means that it is state owned, which means that it's non-marketable. Okay, I define that on the public goods slide. Private equals business, which means it's privately owned, which means it's a part of the market. Okay, I said that as well. So, what's the problem? All right, so the problem with this, as Martin talks about in his article, is it's too simplified and it actually doesn't make sense because this breakdown is inaccurate due to the gray area in the question of higher education being a public good or a private good, especially because in some cases, public education can be seen as both if you think about the definitions. So, although private goods are rivalrous, college entry and college admissions, that's competitive. So therefore, right there we have it can be a public good because college equals knowledge, which is a public good. But at the same time, college is competitive, which means it's a private good. And as Tilak states in this quote, some view that the distinction between public and private is more technical and ideological, and that the public good and the private good definitions, they're not absolute, and at times they can really be ambiguous. So, what's the problem? Shifting higher education from a public good to a private good would actually cause a lot of issues. And referring back to the definitions, a public good is state funded and includes everyone, but a private good, on the other hand, only benefits those in the good. And a private good can be sold, therefore, it excludes those who can't afford it. Therefore, since education is a human right, education as a private good would be violating that human right. The next question, is there a solution? So, this is actually the gap in the research that I found. This is a controversy where, although everyone has their own idea of what a good solution would be, it all comes down to your positionality, where you stand, and how you internalize the concepts and the ideas of public versus private goods. Also, most importantly, where you stand is a direct reflection of your understanding of what a public good is and what a private good is. So, it can be concluded that your definition of these two terms has a very large impact on where you stand, if you think there's a problem, and if so, what you think that solution will be. And finally, conclusion and my thoughts. I feel like higher education can be both public and private. While there are aspects that only the individual partaking in the education can experience, the overall outcome of their education will eventually benefit others. I certainly don't think that higher education should be a commodity to sell and trade because, as stated previously, it then becomes excludable, therefore taking away the human right to education. Thank you very much. And that's the end of my presentation.